the same time, Smith says he started looking for the emails, and it was a month after Donald Trump said this.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Joining me now, Malcolm Nance, an MSNBC counterterror and intel analyst, the author of The Plot to Hack America, and we're joined by Naveed Jamali, a former FBI intelligence operative who worked as a double agent for the FBI against the Russian military intelligence unit and wrote How to Catch a Russian Spy, also a contributor with us. Malcolm, what does this new evidence mean?
Well, it certainly shows that Peter Smith had an extensive network and was dropping names, trying to get people to come on board and do this dirty tricks research campaign that he appeared to be coordinating. I find it noteworthy that he wrote this on September 7th. That's almost 6 weeks after Donald Trump made his Russia, are you listening statement on 27 July. And I think that it generally takes about a month to establish an LLC, as he did in this, in order to have a vehicle, and was out there trying to do this as an independent operator. But I do think he was just dropping names to get, high-level Republicans to come on board or to help him affect this campaign.
So you view it, just to be clear, as him on the make, but no inferred culpability of the people that he may have been citing.
Right, and to be honest, I think there are multiple dirty tricks teams out there.
Right.
This one actually dates pretty far behind some of the ones that we suspect with Roger Stone. The FBI counterintelligence investigation had already started. The CIA was already deeply involved in other American citizens who were in communications with Russian intelligence. He may have been with regards to that and General Flynn, but on this particular point about who he was name dropping, I think he was just doing just that, name dropping.
And Naveed, I want to play Sally Yates' testimony about Michael Flynn, because more than any other name, he is the individual that has figured into this with a lot more potential criminal culpability by his own lawyer's statement since he invoked the Fifth Amendment. Yates referred to problematic conduct, not just words, in her hearing. Take a listen.
The first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself.
What was that underlying conduct?
I hate to frustrate you again, but I think we're going to have to, because my knowledge of his underlying conduct is based on classified information, and so I can't reveal what that underlying conduct is.
Naveed, is there any way to compare that set of statements from her under oath and the circumstantial evidence that's emerging in this report?
I think, Ari, when you think about this and you think about an intelligence operation, while we can't look at the evidence and whether it proves the standard of a crime, I think what you're starting to see is this concept of non-attribution, that this opaqueness, these murky ties, they are in fact what I would say is the fingerprints of a very clear intelligence operation. That is to say,
when you say non-attribution, what is that?
That's a very good point. So if we think about this idea that the Russians are involved in this, it's very unlikely that a Russian intelligence officer, that when they plan out an operation, they want to make sure that the operation is successful. But the other part of that planning is to make sure that if it is compromised, that the lines that trace back to Russia are in fact murky. It's very hard to come back and say this is definitively the Russians. So, an example in the Wall Street Journal report, you hear Russian hackers. What you don't hear is Russian intelligence officers or Russian cyber officers. And it is not to say that they're not being directed by a Russian governmental entity, but this is clearly a tactic, cutouts, if you will, that the Russians and intelligence services use. So when you compare Michael Flynn and you compare this article that came on the Journal, look, Michael Flynn had direct contact. He was sitting in front of Putin. There is a profile that the Russians use when they recruit people, and I think that what you're seeing here is perhaps these breadcrumbs that show, as Malcolm was saying, these dirty trick teams, which again are a layer that are designed to confuse, to sort of make it difficult to link back to the host country. This, in fact, non-attribution that they employ to sort of make the waters murky.
Malcolm, I want to play for you Shane Harris, who broke the story in the Journal, and he's the one that Rachel was citing in her discussion of this story. But I want to push back a little bit on this idea that because Donald Trump said something, it should be treated as true, when so much of what Donald Trump says shouldn't be treated as deferentially automatically true. So he cites that statement that we've played now, and people have seen it repeatedly, that obviously bizarre statement where he said, oh, Russia helped me get those emails. Here's Harris talking about that in the wider context.
So around this same time frame, after Donald Trump made that statement at the rally in Florida that we just heard earlier, U.S. intelligence is picking up these Russian hackers discussing ways to try and get Hillary Clinton's emails from her server and then to transmit that information somehow via an intermediary back to Mike Flynn. It is striking how the activities match up, the description of the mission, if you will, lines up, and the time frame is similar. So it is at least possible that what we're seeing in those reports is the other end of this operation that we discovered that Peter Smith said he was involved in.
So, Malcolm, there's Harris making a classic circumstantial evidentiary argument for how he talked about the hacking, then we see this other independent material going on, and it looks really bad. The flip side to that, Malcolm, is what if the president is just, at the time, the candidate, repeating things he's heard, and hacking was in the news a lot, and he says a lot of other things that haven't borne out to be true? Is it potentially a bad idea as an investigative matter to cherry pick when to believe that he's telling the truth and not just saying something wild?
Well, with Donald Trump, it's always a challenge to determine what's true and what's a lie. In this circumstance, and at that particular time, certainly from what very little that we know that's unclassified now or that's been leaked now, the U.S. intelligence community was on a massive hunt right at that point, trying to figure out who were these American citizens that foreign intelligence agency were telling us were out looking or communicating with Russian intelligence agencies, direct, okay? So when Donald Trump made that statement, that to people inside the intelligence community certainly would see someone who was informed of information that had been going on and had been discussed with him. Someone may have brought this up to him and said, hey, you know, we've got some guys out there, they're looking for Hillary Clinton's emails. Or as I said yesterday, there were reports in Fox News as early as April by Judge Napolitano, who had claimed there was information that was leaked by Sputnik that Putin had Hillary Clinton's emails. All of this may have come to either a team meeting or sitting around, smoking cigars, and he believed it. And whether he believed it or not, we happen to know now there were multiple efforts going on to get that information and other information out into the media sphere. And it was successful. I think Trump just gave up the game. He just didn't realize that he opened his mouth because he was so excited by the prospect. And, that's Mueller's job to get that information to public.
Very, very interesting stuff.